I just want to give you a quick take on my take from the primaries last night. We talked about it before last hour, but the number one takeaway in Republican primaries, Donald Trump is the kingmaker. We've talked about it in the show, talked about it for the past several weeks. Adam Putnam spent 20 years preparing for last night. Donald Trump came in with one endorsement, sidetracked his political career, and helped Ron DeSantis win that race in a landslide. So when it comes to Republican primaries, not the general election, but Republican primaries, make no doubt about it, just like Sarah Palin was the kingmaker for Republicans in 2010, Donald Trump is the kingmaker in 2018. The second lesson, Dems' historic possibilities this year should not mask how far left they've gone. And they are going left in the primary process in a lot of the key marquee states. You look at Georgia, you look at Florida. Those are states in the deep South. But they have candidates. They have black candidates that are talking about Medicare for all. Also, again, adopting more of a Bernie Sanders approach to politics than, say, a Bill Clinton approach. At the same time, they could also be the difference makers, not only in their race for the sort of election turnout we saw in the state of Alabama, but also for people like Bill Nelson, who could really benefit by Mayor Gillum's victory last night. Number three, we need to be on guard as a nation. Many in the media will openly root for the Democratic gubernatorial candidates in Georgia and Florida and across the nation. And Donald Trump will almost certainly use that and his attacks against the media to make this a racial battle, a racial political war. And as Michael Steele said, he started scratching at that last night. Number four, which 2020 Democratic presidential candidates will go to Georgia and Florida? And what will they say? Either of those two Democrats in Georgia and Florida, if they win, then they become kingmakers in 2020. And number five, can a combination of the Hillary, Obama, Bernie Sanders coalition be created and be brought together to help Democrats win? That remains the big question. And Mike Barnicle, that's a question that's going to determine the fate of so many of these Democratic candidates. Can you bring two sides of this Democratic Party that's split apart, the Bernie side and the Clinton side, that split apart? Can you bring them together? And in 2018, can everybody work together to help Democrats win some pretty historic races that are in front of them this November?
Joe, there's going to be a lot of division in the campaigns this fall. There's going to be divisions within the Democratic Party, as you just pointed out. The Sanders wing, the Sanders-Elizabeth Warren wing from the more centrist wing of the Democrats. There's going to be that division that's already unfolding in front of us. And there is certainly going to be, again, as you pointed out, and as Michael Steele pointed out earlier, race is going to be a factor, a big factor in these campaigns, especially, I think, in Florida, where the President of the United States will absolutely engage in a racial way to try and divide the state and encourage people to vote for the Republican candidate.
But Michael Steele, depending on which way the races go, if Republicans win in Georgia and Florida, if Republicans hold on to the United States Senate, if Republicans do fairly well in the House and don't bleed as many seats as they currently expect, it'll be seen as a massive victory for Donald Trump. But the opposite is true.
Yeah.
If Democrats win the Georgia gubernatorial race, if Democrats win the Florida Democratic race, and this is not me rooting for Democrats in these two states, it's just saying the truth. That is a revolution. That is not just a political revolution. That's a societal revolution.
Yeah.
A lot of people have talked about the New South for 30 years. That would usher in the New South, brought to you by the extremism and the racism of Donald Trump.
Well, your fifth point was, for me, really one of the most important points to what you just said, because it really does talk about how Democrats are able to coalesce around this idea of yes, we're disparate and we've got these different parts of the party, but this is about pulling together what we need to win, and how disciplined they will be to do that. When you look at the Florida race, you're talking about not really touted that much, but the impact of Tom Steyer, Gen X, the Parkland students who are now actively out there engaging politically. Those types of forces have a ripple effect across the country. You'll see it come into play in Georgia. So you're absolutely right. How the Democrats are able to pull together this coalition with Donald Trump sort of putting this poison of race and sort of feeding this white nationalist meme and all of that in states like Florida will be very, very important to the outcome come November.
And I just wonder if Republicans are smart enough to understand that some of that race baiting and some of that hatred may work in primary races. But boy, it backfires in the general election.
Oh, yeah.
And I just don't know if they're going to be able to shift gears. Donald Trump hasn't been able to for 18 months. And he's not going to be able to help himself going into the general election. It seems to me that will be a political godsend for Democrats to get people out to vote if Donald Trump keeps playing the race card. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.